Hey everyone, I know it is rare to see 3 reviews in a row in this channel, but between work and life, my schedule was a mess. So yeah, after this, no more reviews for a while, cause I also want to check Code Vein in detail, and share some other ideas. Whatever the case, God Eater 3 was developed in collaboration between Bandai Namco and Marvelous, rather than Shift, the company that worked in the prequels for the PSP and Vita. In this case, as far as I know, this change was done because Bandai Namco wanted to add some spice into the scene with an experienced group. Marvelous is known for developing different kinds of action RPGs, so it was a good transition for home consoles. What's kinda unfortunate is that between God Eater 1 to 3, this is the entry that sold the fewest units, getting kinda stuck between 800,000 and 1 million. So for those expecting to see another entry, not sure that is going to happen, to be honest. Now well, let's dive into topics, shall we? Story-wise, God Eater 3 takes place in 2087, somewhere around 13 years later after the events from God Eater 2. Here we follow a couple of children who will have to go through the Age Aptitude, or Adaptive God Eater Test. In this generation of God Eaters, the Ages are like slaves. Ironically, Ages are much stronger, and in a sense closer to the Aragami, reason why they need 2 bracelets in comparison to the previous generations. What's disheartening is that in this period of time, the struggle to survive is worse, because of the ashlands, a corrosive phenomenon that pretty much devours everything. So if the Aragami were already a piece of work, now it isn't even possible to fight them head-on, under normal circumstances, because of possible ashstorms, where God Eaters will simply succumb in matter of minutes or seconds. And in response to this phenomenon, those with power saw orphans as cheap labor, picking him as Age's test. So that is how we begin this adventure, as a slave completing quest, while you see younger ones fall ill because of the harsh circumstances. Time later, there is an opportunity to run out of the slave work, as the MC of this game is another absolute unit. This is where Hilda gets an eye on this group, and decides to help them. Unfortunately, this happens for a small period of time, because at the end of the day, they are owned. This is the very beginning of the journey, but what can I say about everything else? God Eater 3 is composed by 3 arcs. In the first part we get to know what is the state of affairs and how everything more or less works with the ashlands, and those who pull the strings in hideous ways. It is ironic, but there are several similarities as in real life, at least putting certain parts into context. In the second arc, we get to know about some specific things about this world, and in the very last stretch of the game, our partners. Yep, in comparison to the second entry, where we can combine partners' stories and the main campaign, here we cannot really do that until this point. Now things definitely took a twist here because of the change of developers, and while Hiroshi Yoshimaru worked as scenario director, it is clear that the Marvelous team didn't want to get as gory as Shift writers, with weird and questionable things left and right. While there is a nice pace and things are quite interesting, you have me expecting some disgusting scenes as in the prequel, but here what they pulled was more like pitiful situations because of the children topics. To me, this story gets an 8. I believe it is good. There are multiple parts where things reach high points, and there is coherence with the lore because of the aforementioned scenario director, but I won't deny that it was toned down in terms of the script. At least that is my opinion. Gameplay-wise, similarly as God Eater 2, this is another Monster Hunter-like game, where we need to complete some quests to proceed in the story. In general, they are the classic go there and beat some small enemies, get the hang of the game, and then beat some bigger enemies. Word of advice: these games are grindy and repetitive in nature, meaning that if the following doesn't sound entertaining for you, since right now I will say that this is not a game for you. Simple as that. In comparison with the second entry, the main difference here is that this game is easy, really easy, at least considering the story quest, because in God Eater 2 there were quests where sometimes I needed like 15 or 20 minutes, because of the number of enemies and their general HP pools, but here you can literally own them in like 10 or 5 minutes. Enemies that were a pain in the arse, as the QB, are walking the park here. Now, there are different ways to look at this, because beating a sponge isn't that exciting either. Yeah, it sounds dumb, but making a hard game is actually hard. In my case, I wanted to fight harder enemies. Let's say that they have the same HP but they hit slightly harder or something along those lines, because similarly as the previous entry, there is no real reason to farm. At the end, you can advance with equipment from 2 ranks below, or at least that is how it worked on my end. Now, this doesn't mean it is bad, but it is disappointing, as most of these kinds of games are quite challenging. Something that I would have liked to see were older enemies, as many as possible, because at the end of the day they are the ones that spice the general adventure. Otherwise, things start to feel stagnant, and while there is a better balance regarding encounters, now there is a lack of variety. I know, it is ironic. At least there are some interesting encounters in the extras, but that is pretty much finishing the whole game. In other words, if you're here because of the story and the story alone, chances are that you won't fight some or any of those enemies. But in case you are interested in that, there are numerous encounters, online ones, where you don't need to pay, but you will play with NPCs. The first part of the story, which goes up to difficulty 7, then you open the second arc, and after finishing the third arc you will get access to the real fights, where you need to exploit skills and stuff like that, because that is where you find the real sponges of HP. It is worth mentioning that these fights have a twist in between, increasing damage within certain areas, reducing your stats, and so on. Unfortunately, this is the very last section you unlock. Regarding customization, there are new guns and melee weapons, as well as new modules, so you can change blood orbs for specific attacks as the normal combo, where you can press square or triangle, or different combinations. The same goes for jumping attacks and step ones. These changes definitely add a lot to the game, as you don't feel forced to just use the conventional square attack. At least you can spice things up depending from your gameplay. As for equipment progression, the only thing to consider is that by finishing quest, you unlock blueprints. In other words, if you don't take your time to progress through some optional quest, you won't be able to craft better stuff. While it may look as a chore, it isn't that big of a deal, cause in the third arc you can advance through this optional quest. Aside from that, there is no real need to add extra skills as in the previous entry, until the last stretch of the game. Considering those details, I will say that God Eater 3 gameplay is an 8.5. It is definitely better than the prequel, at least considering the flow of the fights. This is just on me, but it would have been interesting to see some challenging fights here and there, but aside from that, it was a nice change. In the graphics section, I check glitches, aesthetics, and visuals in general. While playing the game, it never closed. I didn't experience drops or things along those lines. The only detail is that there are some attacks that can stuck a bit your character. This happens when you're beating an enemy while constantly jumping. I didn't record it, but once I kinda got stuck and then reappeared on the side of the monster in a funny way. It is worth mentioning that it doesn't really matter, but you can lose some seconds as you cannot move while falling. Aside from that, there were no other problems to the detriment of the experience. In comparison with God Eater 2 and Resurrection, here we have a new engine. As far as I know, it is an in-house engine developed by Marvelous, and what an amazing job they did. The previous releases used the engine created by Shift, and yeah, they were good, but it started to look kinda dated. However, God Eater 3 benefit a lot from this change, as it feels like it flows a bit better, and the enemies look much better. My only complaint is regarding shining elements like in buildings and stuff like that. It seems like some light sources produce too much contrast, and the image can certainly become a bit saturated. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I feel the light sources could have been controlled a little better. Despite these minor details, I really liked how this game looks, especially with a couple of animated cutscenes it includes. I would give it a 9. And last but not least, its music. God Eater 3 OST was mainly composed by Masaru Shina. He has worked on many video games and animes. I didn't mention him in God Eater 2, but yeah, he also worked there. The main difference here is that he focused much more into vocals and orchestral executions, at least in comparison with the prequel, where lyrics and combination between electronic and orchestral tunes were predominant. And yeah, when it comes to music, I've always been transparent with my taste, and I definitely enjoy this OST much more. It feels quite epic when you're beating the ass out of a monster, Well, there is orchestral music with choirs, and thank goodness there were no auto-tune tracks, or at least I didn't notice them. What's cool about this specific combination between orchestral music and choirs is that they can immerse you in a way where you feel the rush or need to beat the enemy quite fast, and for these kinds of games that works in a marvelous way. It is worth mentioning that there were some tracks from previous God Eaters like Be It Animo, The Angel's Reception, among others, but I mentioned specifically those two because they are simply beautiful. And it is also nice that with this entry they threw away the older quality. That is of course going picky, and considering what I previously mentioned about God Eater 2's soundtrack, as a well guess from my side. To me this OST is an 8.5, it definitely hooked me much more, at least in comparison with the prequels. God Eater 3 final score is an 8.5. It is a really good game, with a nice story and much better combats, but then again, because of its niche formula, I only recommend it for those who enjoy farming sessions, because that is how it feels. But if you can let past that, or you enjoy that, then yeah, you will have fun with this game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.